good afternoon wherever you are in the world. If it's morning where you are, good morning. If it's evening where you are, good evening. My name is Bryant Francis. I am a contributing editor at Gamasutra.com. As usual, my face is hidden from you. I float about in the ether, inhabiting games and commenting on games, but I do not truly exist. And in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, I am joined by Alex, Joey, and Jesse, three wonderful faces. Alex, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi. Hello. My name is Alex Waro. I'm editor at Gamasutra, and I am the least of the three. We are joined by two fantastic, cool dudes. Cool dudes. Who wants to go first and tell the people who you are?
Sure, I'll go.
Nice.
My name is Joey Wiggs. I'm the lead programmer on a little indie game called Eon Alter. We're also doing another game called Spark Resistance. And I didn't get my start in the game industry, but here I am, and I love it.
Welcome.
Hi, I'm Jesse Harlan. I'm a composer. I've been at this for a while. Most recently, I did what I do most recently: Mafia 3, Futurama: Worlds of Tomorrow, Star Wars: The Old Republic. I've been at this for a while, about 18 years.
Nice. Brian.
They're the subtitles. Sorry, I was like, where are those? Hi, what were you going to ask me, Alex?
I was going to ask, what are you doing and what's going on in the stream right now? Because I'm deeply confused.
Right. This is Final Fantasy XII, or more specifically, Final Fantasy XII: The Zodiac Age. It's a game that was released first in 2006. Now has been re-released under the moniker The Zodiac Age by Square Enix. And it is a remastering of the original Final Fantasy game, but also it contains some upgrades to the game that were only original in the international edition of the game. I'm sorry, we're getting some horrible...
yeah, that's really strange.
That was really unusual what happened right there. Some weird data moshing. But basically, this is it's out. It's just the remastered version just came out, and now for our bemusement and education and edification, we're here to play it with a couple developers who had very strong opinions about it when they played it when it came out. So right now, I am Vaughn, the poor child with the washboard abs in the center. And we've been locked up in prison as thieves with this charming feller, Baltier, who's part of my party. And it looks like we're about to get into a rumble.
I don't remember this scene at all. We were talking before the stream when everything was looking really good and not choppy at all about sort of how long it's been since any of us had really spent meaningful time with this game. Joey, Jesse, what are your memories of this project?
Yeah. I went back and I watched a YouTube video to refresh my memory of what the story was, and one of the things that was fascinating to me is that for a game that is so deeply steeped in thick politics, I remember absolutely none of that. Nothing from it. I remember all of the characters. I remember all of the locations. I remember the environments. The action, I remember exploring everything, but I remember, like, as far as what is the story about, if you had asked me before I watched that recap video, I would have said, it's about some dude, some, like, blonde dude who looks like most Final Fantasy heroes, who goes up against evil, medieval Judge Dredd type judges. And I think there's crystals, because there usually is in a Final Fantasy game. But that was all I remembered.
See, on my end, I remember like pretty much the opposite. For me, Final Fantasy Tactics is one of my favorite games of all time, and the storyline of it, the political like machinations in that game, were fascinating to me. And so Final Fantasy 12, for me, was bringing all of that stuff to a more modern look and feel at the time. And so most of what I remember like is the story. And, you know, the mechanics and stuff. But the characters, for me, aside from Balthier, are actually pretty washy. Like, I don't remember much about the characters aside from Balthier.
Actually, I should say, yeah. What's his name? Bosch, the guy with the scar on his eye. I didn't remember him at all. I remembered every other character really deeply, and then that dude just is like a blank hole in my memory.
The only reason why I remember him is because of Vaughn's scene in, it's not long after this one, but you go to this floating island and you're trying to get the attention, like, spoiler alert, oh my god, you're trying to get the attention of some resistance, and Vaughn just runs around yelling Bosch's name. It's like, I'm Bosch von Ronsenberg, blah, blah, blah. And it's a really annoying piece of gameplay. Like, I hated the gameplay, but because you're just sitting there, you're running around trying to shout at things, making sure your bar doesn't go to the bottom. And so you have to shout at the right people at the right times, and but that's the only reason why I even remember Bosch.
Oh, I do remember that part, and I remember, I haven't seen a primary source on this, but it's widely reported in the years since this game was released that during development, like, there was the lead designer's initial conception was that character Bosch would be the main character, and that at some point during development, it's believed that, like, there was some pressure from other people in the company to make a younger, more relatable for young audiences protagonist, and that's why Vaughn is the player character. I always liked Bosch and Balthier better. I'm not really sure how I feel about Vaughn as a protagonist, but I don't know. Brian, how do you feel?
Vaughn has not endeavored himself onto me very much. He's kind of I've played like a handful of Final Fantasy games. And even like Prince Noctis in 15 was like actually more charismatic to me because at least like his broodingness sort of had a point. Mm-hmm. Vaughn just sort of seems like a troublemaker, caught up in things bigger than him, which is a decent place for stories to start. But like you said, he's a late addition, and you sort of feel that no matter what. That being said, I think my first talking point of interest is someone mentioned Tactics and the Ivalice games a second ago, and I think this is one of the unique things about Final Fantasy's development is that within the world of, like, within Square Enix, there's a setting that they rely on for certain Final Fantasy games. Started in Final Fantasy Tactics, continued in Tactics Advance and Tactics Advance 2, and now it's here in Final Fantasy 12, and there was one Nintendo DS game that followed up with this. Someone in here before the chat, I forget who, mentioned that's because the director of Final Fantasy Tactics Advance directed Final Fantasy 12.
Yeah, we should pull this up. So this game has a complicated development. It ran long, like so many projects do. It saw shifts in development. I don't have that information right at hand, but yeah, I believe that is the case. The guy
Matsuno?
Yasumi Matsuno. Pardon me. He was director for a lot of it, and he's the one that left. I think citing health reasons, although we're not exactly sure if that's the case or not. Late in development, and then I think he was replaced by somebody else, which we have here. If I can pull up our post-mortem from Game Developer Magazine in 2007, which is a really interesting thing. But yeah, no, you're right. To your point, Brian, the guy who worked on this, and it's all of a piece, certainly. What is it about the Ivalice games that you think stands out and sort of strikes you as being notable?
I'll jump actually no, I'll answer that, and then I'll let our two guests answer that. For me it was Final Fantasy Tactics Advance is my favorite Final Fantasy game. I think like the consistency of rules that are all over it, like, and that game had like this whole judging system that was really fascinating. There's kind of a setting and a purpose to it that other games don't have, and now they've carried it over several games, gives that more weight. The Bangra, the Viera, they aren't all in the first Tactics game, which got re-released as War of the Roses, right?
War of the Lions.
War of the Lions,
yeah. They aren't in that game, but still, like the idea that there's a Final Fantasy out there dedicated to factions and politics, as opposed to end of the world shenanigans, I think works really well. Like, I remember Tactics being at its best when it was about like as a 12-year-old, it was kind of like, not a 12-year-old, I played it a lot older because I played it on the iPad, but it's like I can see why like it was a Final Fantasy game that sort of like turned its nose up at religion and the church had an appeal versus just another Final Fantasy game where you save the world. And now there's a Final Fantasy game where like the 12 is kind of a Final Fantasy game where, you know, everyone's in love with sky pirates and everyone's in love with living outside the law to try and get things done.
Yeah, so I apologize for that brain fart earlier. Basically, this game development started in 2000 roundabout, and it was led by a duo. It was by Tactics director Yasumi Matsuno and Final Fantasy IX director Hiroyuki Ito. And then throughout development, I think at some point Matsuno sort of retired. He took a break. And then he was not replaced, but let's say Ito was joined by Hiroshi Minagawa, and that's who oversaw the game through its actual release. And like, I think what's really interesting about it in the canon of like JRPGs and Final Fantasy specifically is the combat system, right? Which we've been seeing as you've been playing. And it's funny, it doesn't look so weird now. It looks kind of just like a video game.
Well, you're all watching it, I'm playing it, and I just take my hands off the controller when combat starts.
Right.
But at the same time, that's also what you do in certain games now.
Yeah, so like what's striking is that unlike every other Final Fantasy game before it, battles don't take place on a separate screen, doesn't go to a separate battle mode, they just happen in the environment. And then as you point out, because you can program your characters through the Gambit system, which was new, you are literally often just taking your hands off the controller, which is still super weird.
I love the Gambit system, but I'm a programmer, so I'm biased.
No, I loved it too, and you know, I've played every Final Fantasy game except the Tactics games. And well, actually, I shouldn't say every, because I also haven't played the online ones, and so now I'm starting to add more and more exceptions to my every that I first said. But I played, I played 1 through 15, and remember I remember playing the first one on the NES when I was a little kid, and have enjoyed every game when it came out. And this one, the fact that the combat system was so fluid was just fascinating. Especially because I adored Final Fantasy X, and I thought at the time, like, that's it. Like, Final Fantasy's reached, like, just do this forever, please. Just give me new stories and characters, but these mechanics, everything works beautifully. Thank you. You figured it out. Thank you. And then 12 came out, and I was like, forget what I said about 10. Do this, please, forever now. So I loved it. I really did. I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, Flipsider points off that it seems hands-off because you can program everything. You're given all this control over the combat that actually matters a lot as you go down the line.
Yeah, I know that there was a lot of cases, like especially bosses and whatnot. I end up micromanaging my characters a lot because bosses will have very different tactics than your total random schmucks that are running around. For me, the Gambit system was a lot of fun from like a programming aspect, but it was also really interesting from a just control aspect because, like, as somebody had mentioned previously, there's a lot more games doing this sort of thing now. And if you look at what game was it? Ogre Battle. Way back in the day, the original Ogre Battle had a very similar thing where you didn't actually control any of your characters directly. You created squads. They all had their specific actions set ahead of time, and then you sent them into battle, and they did their thing. And Final Fantasy XII, for me, was a bit of a throwback to that in terms of, like, oh, I'm actually, like, what is the most efficient death squad can I build without me having to put any input in? And that was almost a fun mini game unto itself.
Wow, I should go back and look. Was that Ogre Battle on the Super Nintendo?
Yes, that was Ogre Battle on the Super Nintendo.
All right, I should go back and check that out. That sounds fascinating. I was gonna say that this game itself seems like a precursor to a whole like subgenre these days of like programming puzzle games, which is probably unfair because those games probably existed since long before this game was out. And as you point out, apparently Ogre Battle, there's something super similar like a decade or two earlier. But watching Brian now play through it, it reminds me of what is so interesting about games like Human Resource Machine, right? Which is like you have to figure out how to solve, like you have to think through a problem in advance and figure out how to solve it using the tools you have available to you, then lay them out in a certain order and hit go. And that's what like every combat encounter in this game feels like a small programming challenge in a way that I never really saw when it first came out.
Yeah, no, it was pretty freaking awesome. Actually, it's funny because everybody bashes on FF13's combat system, and I see a lot of the same sort of deal here, where FF13 was less about micro actions and more about like your combat squad and sending them out and then switching your stances basically, and it felt like a different evolution of what the Gambit system could have been.
Yeah, and like now it seems like when you get to 15, it's almost it's an evolution in a way, but it's sort of like settled back into what a lot of games are doing these days, which is like a Mass Effect model where you have control over one character and then the other characters can be ordered and have their own AI. But none of it really had that sort of like programmer like that sense of programming through your way through a problem that this game does.
Yeah, no, the FF12 is kind of a little, I want to say raw in that aspect. Like you see a lot of the machine with the UI that the Gambit system gives you, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. It's just a thing. I kind of wish more games used AI systems like the Gambit system, because there's plenty of those autoplay games where I'm just sitting there going, "No AI, what are you doing? Why are you doing this to me? No, you should have used that heal on that character. No, no. Oh, now I'm dead."
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of like it begs the question of why do games need auto AI for play? If they're trying to make supposedly fun gameplay, and the answer is there's a lot of games that essentially translate player actions into AI. You think of real-time strategy games. You're basically just kind of like create a combat system where you're asking the player not to think about the moment-to-moment interactions, but sort of a broader specs, broader unit choices, broader strategy. Like that's the kind of thing that in theory, auto systems should be good for. And this game has a pretty good one. Like this if-then logic thing is really cool.
Yep.
I'm sorry, I was just distracted by the abs. And I forgot how much. So I also, unlike you, Jesse, I played the tactics games and really enjoyed them. I also enjoy a lot of the Final Fantasy games, but I really enjoy a lot of the themes and like flavor, and I guess like I don't know if I'd say lore, but like just like the sense of style that is present in a lot of the Ivalice games, and like the really overhanded arch like Baroque way of speaking everyone has. And so when like Balthier says like "spare us your quidities," I just get really excited and I have a hard time.
Oh my god, like the whole
I gotta say, I think that as far as the dialogue and acting and everything, I think 12's my favorite. There's a really wonderful beauty to what they did in Final Fantasy X, because it was the first voiced one, and characters like Waka, like you get to hear Final Fantasy, and suddenly like for the first time you're hearing it, and it turns out some of the people sound like they're from Hawaii, and that was like, wow, I didn't see that.
Yeah.
And you finally learn how to pronounce chocobo.
Yeah, right. And then 12 comes on its heels, and it's so different in tone, and they refined their process. They refined their direction process and their acting process and their implementation process. And one of the things that 10 had, to me as an audio professional, 10 had some glaring issues where you could tell someone is reading these lines on their own as a single person in a studio. They're not interacting with somebody else, and so the way they say yes, the way they say of course, the way they say short lines doesn't always respond correctly to what is actually the line that precedes it or follows it. They get the wrong inflection, they get the wrong tone, the wrong intention. 12 was a lot better about that, and I remember being way more impressed with just the cohesion of the voice and the dialogue and the script and everything. I remember being bummed, though, that in a world with so many rich, different kinds of races, all of the heroes except for Fran are humans.
Yeah. I mean, that's I didn't stand out to me when this game first came out because I hadn't yet played the advanced games, right? I happened to pick those up when a friend was kind enough to let me borrow his Game Boy. But in the tactics game, there isn't really, that I recall, a ton of non-human characters. So the fact that Fran is one of the few, and there's no this is so embarrassing. I don't remember their names, but the people with the ears, floppy ears. What are they? I don't know. Like they look kind of like sad elephants. Sad elephant.
The
priests.
Bangra?
Yeah.
The Bunga? Yeah.
Oh, they're lizard people.
Yeah, like they were kind of a surprise to me because they're all throughout this opening section. But yeah, I guess you never really get to play as one of them. They're sort of just relegated.
They're the
to
bad
side.
guys.
Yeah.
And then there's like cat people later, and there's all kinds of things in the game.
Cool.
Which is weird because in Tactics Advance, the setting they originated from, they were just regular party members that you could recruit.
Yeah, tell us a bit about like Brian, what was your first experience with this game? Like you mentioned you came off the Tactics games. Like
Yeah.
did this really match up with what you were expecting from a mainline Final Fantasy set in an Evil East setting?
It's so different. It's kind of a reminder that like I think it's better. It's so many Final Fantasy games don't sort of develop off one another. They develop in such standalone environments that it's like if I was like just solely relying on what I think a Final Fantasy or a Tactics game should be, I would be really disappointed right now because it's not the fantasy world from Tactics. Which was tied to our world because it was in a book. We just saw a judge, which was which was one of the major characters in the Tactics games, and judges enforced like the weird arbitrary rule system as clans battle each other. Here, they're just part of like a political faction.
I love the character design on those judges. The helmet design is fantastic.
Yeah. So it's kind of a reminder that like Final Fantasy developers like just look at sequel development so differently than I think developers of other games, even within Japanese development culture, do. Just because they sort of see these ideas as more flexible and not worth persisting from game to game. But sometimes they see things that are worth keeping, like just the Bangra and the Viera, or even like the idea that like there's someone in all these games named Biggs.
Yeah, Biggs and Wedge.
Biggs and Wedge, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is just funny.
But that's from Star Wars.
Yeah. Or I guess that's the localizers really doing that, but
I think the Japanese version of those names is the same thing. I remember reading an interview that the person who inserted them originally really liked Star Wars.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And this is like the Star Warsy game, isn't it? Like I've heard a few people compare this one to Star Wars because
the
Scrappy
score
Kid.
particularly sounds very Star Warsy.
Yeah.
It is basically Star Wars, right? I mean, you have like the smuggler with his non-human companion. You have the the princess without without a home, and you have this scrappy kid. It's just
That's right. It's the game that asks, "What if Chewbacca were a sexy bunny?"
Nope. This is bad. Don't fight
the
that.
only one that has the temerity. So, Brian, I asked you that A because I was interested and I care about you and I want to know what you think and I value your opinion. But B, so I could go back to this postmortem published in Game Developer Magazine 10 years ago because there was a there was a passage that I really wanted to read and we're never going to get to it. So I just want to like put it in now because I want to hear what you guys think of it. It's the very closing moment, right? And this was published a decade ago by Taku Murata, who worked as general manager of research and R&D for Square Enix. He, I think, worked on this new version too, so he's been there for a while. And after listing what went right and what went wrong with the project, which is a whole thing in itself, he gives this kind of vague but interesting anecdote, if you guys don't mind me just reading. Basically, he's saying, in order to write this article, we assembled all the key players for a postmortem meeting. Their game design director, Hiroyuki Ito, shared the following story. In order to release his dev team from the state of inflation it had fallen into, like they were just so busy and crammed at the end, Ito told the planners under him to cease working on quests that were behind in production. He told them to throw it all away, even though the team was approaching the end of the scheduled dev process. Of course, he was able to initiate this shock treatment because he knew there were enough completed quests at that point for the game to actually be complete, and he knew which parts were burdening the staff. Ito confided that he had doubts until the last minute about telling the team that it simply could not use all its resources, telling the staff to lighten their load. In Japan, game projects are generally very heavily planned on the front end of the project, and we rarely cut features at the end. Here's where it gets like really good. All right, so in Japanese food culture, when boiling beans, the cook pours cold water, called surprising water, into the pot right before boiling is complete. It is said that by decreasing the temperature of the water for a moment, a sort of resistance develops when one eats it. The bold direction to throw everything away had a similar effect on the staff members and created an important turning point in preparation for the end of development. Like, I don't know what that means, but it sounds like what they're saying is that right near the end, they just kind of like threw everything that was on their mind away and just tried to like get a sense of like what was important. And I kind of wanted to know from the two of you that have like really played this game and actually presumably finished it, which I have not, if that like shines through in any way in the final product, do you think?
I mean, maybe. I take a look at this and Final Fantasy 13 and Final Fantasy 10, and this to me seems the most focused of those. 13, I remember being weird. Like, balancing in that game was really weird. You could die really early against things that shouldn't kill you, and then later there'd be some giant monster and you'd hit it and kill it in like three rounds or something. And it just was all over the map.
Right.
And this one never felt like that. This one felt, like I said, like this to me when I finished it as a kind of lifelong fan of Final Fantasy games, I remember thinking, awesome. They figured out the whole template. They've got it down now. They just need to, change the art assets and change the audio assets, and they've got the core here to just make great games going forward. So yeah, maybe. I mean, maybe that sense of tossing things away got them to focus and figure out what was like absolutely essential.
I'm going to briefly point out something about that Game Developer Magazine postmortem that Alex just quoted. Jesse here is in it.
Well,
What?
not the post-mortem, but
Not
I
the
mean
postmortem. Sorry, the article.
He wrote
The issue. The issue.
in the issue. Yeah.
He wrote the audio column in that issue.
Yes, I wrote the audio column for Game Developer Magazine for 6 years, and that was a lot of fun to do and very difficult. By the end of 6 years, it was like, what can I say about audio? Like, I've been doing this every month for 6 years, and that was when I knew it was like, okay, it's not fun anymore. It's time for me to hand it over to somebody new. But I loved getting the chance to write those articles. It was a lot of fun.
I'm just kind of curious. This is not a Final Fantasy related question, but do you now? Do you feel like now that you've had time to recharge, do you feel like the kind of reflections you were making on game audio, have those started to come back to you again? Not that you like want to
Totally.
write. They're back.
Yeah, all the time. Yeah, totally. I mean, it's funny. Like, it's so interesting. The idea of perspective is so interesting because, like, take for instance, Bryant, the experience you had with this game versus the experience I had with this game. You were in high school when you played this game.
Yeah.
And you were a fan of the tactics game that you enjoyed when you were even younger then. And so you, like, ate up all the, like, politics stuff. I played this game when I was 30, and I was working at LucasArts. We were doing The Force Unleashed, Indiana Jones and the Staff of Kings, I think a Thrillville game, and some other games that never came out, and I was planning my wedding with my wife. And so maybe the reason I don't remember the politics stuff from this game is that whenever it came up, I was like, skip. I don't have time for this. I got too much other stuff in my life. I just want to slash things while I've got 15 minutes before I have to pass out and then go back to work. So yeah, perspective is fascinating in that, when I have that gig and I've been doing it for a long time, I get tired of it and I feel like I don't have anything to say anymore. Now it's been, I don't know when the last issue I worked on was, but it's probably been close to 10 years. I don't know when the last one was, but it's probably been close to 10 years since I've written an article. And I think of things all the time now to like I've thought, oh, well, maybe I'll blog about something, but then it's like, do people read blogs anymore? And then it's like, well, maybe I'll set up a YouTube channel about it. And it's like, I don't have time for that. I got a two-month-old that I'm trying to keep alive right now. I don't have time for that sort of stuff. But I think about it all the time. I think about game audio, and I think about what we as an industry are doing all the time, and I think about getting back into it and putting that writer hat back on for sure.
You should. I know a website that would be super interested in publishing things from a game audio professional.
I just, it's funny. Like I actually did. I just wrote a blog post that got featured on Gamasutra recently, all about the like massively emotional experience I had with Fallout 4's junk system.
Yeah.
Huh. I haven't read that yet, but I will. It sounds really, really good. I'm just curious. I mean, we'll get back to Final Fantasy within like a minute, but just real quick, what was so affecting about the junk system and how you used it in Fallout 4?
Well, I mean, if you haven't played Fallout 4, plug your ears because I'll spoil things here. But I flip back and forth when I play open world games between playing male characters and female characters. So if I play a male character in one, I'll play a female character in the next one. And usually it doesn't make any difference. But for some reason, it really made a difference in Fallout 4. And that may be due to the fact that I was like playing the game when I knew we were about to have a baby. And here's this story where I'm playing as a mom who has her child stolen in front of her eyes in the opening moments of the game, and then you're thrust out into the wasteland and given this system whereby you can recreate the world out of junk. And it just was like, holy shit, I need to like, I'm nesting. Like I need to like
build a better world,
really nice house and make a nice life for my infant child that was stolen from me. And then I marched out into the world and discovered that, oh wait, my infant son is actually a 60-year-old man, and I've missed his whole growing up, and it was really emotional to me. And I had spent so much time killing people out in the world trying to like salvage basketballs for a child that will never end up playing with them. And that to me was like, it was an amazing experience to have from a game, and probably not one that Bethesda expected me to have, but absolutely one that I had.
Huh, I will totally read that. I bet you hung on to all those board games too. Like every other house in that game has some old board game sitting in a corner somewhere that you're supposed to like break up to make, I don't remember, radio parts or something. Who knows?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But, and like not only that, but there's then like everything that's in the game has at least one clean, nice version of it hidden somewhere in the game too. So I would scout the world and take all the clean stuff and put that in my son's bedroom, and then came to discover that it was a bedroom he'd never live in.
Brian, do you feel affected? Do you feel like you're trying to build a better world in this game about like political upheaval and rebels without a cause?
At this point, no, but that's also, in my defense, everyone is still very much motivated by thieves, and, we all hate this guy, shirtless man over here. We don't like him. Like, that's
right.
That's the only motivation I've been given. I'd love to win, I think I leveled up here, so I'm out of MP.
Yeah, I was gonna say, all those flans are gonna rip you to shreds unless you get some MP here.
Yeah, I should have...
You have no ethers.
Let's see what this Knot of Rust does.
I think it does random damage.
Oh, it worked.
I think it does a random like 1 to 999 damage or something like that.
Yeah, I'll take it. These guys will be okay. I was gonna say, Fran should have a thing where she attacks, she gets MP back.
I think that's something you get on the license board at some point.
Speaking of which, let's check out the license board since that was a big deal. So
I wanted. Oh, sorry. I was gonna say, do you mind if we go back to one of the conversations super quick?
Sure, go for it.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say about the dev cycle and them dropping everything way back when. This is pretty far back. It's hard to comment on somebody else's developer cycle because you have no idea really what's going on.
Yes.
But at the same time, you can tell like as a consumer what it looks like from your end. And so the game Final Fantasy XII felt like a finished game. Like it didn't feel unfinished. None of the Final Fantasies really feel unfinished. Except for maybe the initial version of Final Fantasy XIV, but there's a really good documentary on that right now. But one of the things I did notice the first time I played it was the ending of the game is really rapid. Like you're doing you got like these really long quests, and you're going to grab things, and you're killing super bosses, and you're all that, and then there's suddenly a point in the story where it accelerates to like 8 times the story flow speed that it was before, and suddenly you're at the end, and I'm just like, oh, that's the part where I'm like, maybe they spent a lot of the time up front at the beginning of the game, but which makes perfect sense in terms of dev allocating resources because that's where most people are. But it did feel really rushed at the end, like the story wise.
Well, in the new edition, you can actually speed it up to times 16, so you can just like plow through that last bit, right?
So it could be
like
faster.
Yeah. I was just I was finishing that. I didn't read it all because it's paragraphs, but I was finishing that anecdote while we were talking, and basically like it seems like what that writer was trying to get at all those years ago was that basically this project was, according to him, like a pressure cooker at Square, which he said was common back then, and like we kind of have to remember, like I'm sure you guys do, that like this was in 2006, right? So this was being developed right as the movie was coming out, because like I think
right
10 came out in 2001, right? And then the movie comes in 2001. 11 comes out in 2002, the online one, and then this comes out late in 2006. So like when they're working on this, they're dealing with the fallout from the movie. They've got the weight of 11 that's live and being developed, and he's like, oh, this is a real pressure cooker of an environment to be working in. And so, like, I think that's why he highlights at the very end, like, it was important for us that Itoi basically said, like, everyone just, like, put aside what is troubling you the most and, like, take a breath, step away, and pour that magic bean water in and, like, figure out what's important to the end of this game. And that might, in some small way, have influenced the way it wraps up. Although...
Did they help? They also had Crystal Chronicles going on not long...
Right,
I played that.
Different from here too.
That was
so
a wild game.
I never played that. Was there the one with the bucket? Was there a bucket involved in that?
Yeah, because you had to escort the.
Yeah.
Like you had to escort.
Carry the bucket.
You were trying to collect all that light and stuff. Oh, this looks cool.
My favorite game.
Oh yeah, this is one of the mischarges. It's like their limit break system.
Oh, I never saw these.
Wait, was this just a triangle there?
So what you do for the, if I recall correctly, for that, I can't remember, it's like mischarge system. It's like the limit break system. Your MP bar ends up getting, like, you get like these charge symbols, circles, and they're based on like how big your MP bar is. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is that as you unlock them on your license board, when you go into like limit mode or whatever, I don't remember what it's called, you end up getting icons at the bottom screen for different characters who also have their mischarges available, and you can basically chain them. But they give you, it's sort of randomized because they'll be like, oh, maybe this time you can see Vaughn's level 1 is available and Balthier's level 2 is available, so you're going to chain one of the two, and you make that choice. And you only have so much time to chain them, which was the time's up thing at the top. So even if you had lots, because you can use the mischarge system to regain your mana as well. Mm-hmm. So if they didn't have the timer, you could do it infinitely.
Is it just me, or this is like, I mean, the Gambit system was like, it was sort of ballyhooed a little bit at the time. I seem to recall a Penny Arcade comic that made fun of the idea of a game playing itself with some crude imagery. But,
yeah.
Two of these idiots.
Well, I mean, and you can see why, right? Like we were just watching on the Twitch stream while you were killing a monster in a corner, and Balthier was programmed to just stand there and watch you. Like, all right, man. Like, I guess, I mean, you don't have a weapon, so fair, but also,
yeah. Sky Pirates, man.
Maybe just cheer me on at least.
Yeah. Jesus. We're gonna be here a while with these, unless Fran's got some MP back, I think so. I think this was also the Final Fantasy where people started to realize these games were getting really complicated in their combat systems. This is where Final Fantasy, they weren't just characters have these abilities anymore and you use these abilities. This was sort of a part of the Gambit system, I think. How do you all feel about the way Final Fantasy's combat has evolved around this game and since this game?
Well, I mean, I think somebody touched on it earlier, and like every Final Fantasy is so very different from the previous Final Fantasy, which is like probably it is to Square Enix benefit, and I was gonna say, what was the word I was gonna say? It's gone now. But anyway, so one of the interesting things that Final Fantasy XII, the original version that we got in the English-speaking world, versus like the international version, like you were bringing up the license boards previously, and you see there are classes now. In the original, there were not classes. Mm-hmm. Every character was basically identical except for their animations. So funnily enough, Fran and Balthier were actually the worst characters at range because their animations are the longest. But the like you looked at Final Fantasy VI and Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VIII, they basically eschewed the job system for characters that were a lot more generic. You could make anybody anything, and Final Fantasy XII followed into that. Final Fantasy X sort of had that where you can make characters into anything, but they had very explicit classes until pretty much the end of the game. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the things that really bothered me about 12 was I could make anybody anything, and you could make characters who could do literally everything, and that didn't feel compelling to me at the time. So I'm actually really excited to play the new version, the Zodiac Age version, which is the international version plus some for that. But then you look at 13, and it's sort of a mishmash. Like, you can't have everybody be everything, but you can have them be most things. And I haven't actually played 15 yet, so I can't comment on that one.
I've played a little bit of it, not enough to really be able to comment either, but I remember, like, honestly, I started playing 15, and I hadn't seen any press or anything for it. I hadn't seen any discussions about it. I just knew there was a new game and got it and started playing it. And played through it only for about an hour. And I got to where you meet Cindy.
Right.
And at that point I was like, I just can't do this. I just
Yep.
I can't sit here again with another mostly naked except for boots character and try and play this game next to my wife and try and explain to her what the hell is going on with this game, because we'll sit in the living room and she'll be playing a game on her phone and I'll be playing that, or she'll be playing it with me, and it just was like, I can't. It was the same thing with Fran when in 12.
Right.
My wife and I love playing Final Fantasy games, but then it's a strange experience to be playing a game with your wife when somebody's ass is in, because she's 7 feet tall. Yep. Her ass is in the middle of the screen all the time, and it's not like the other characters. They're shorter, so you're just staring at her ass the whole time. And yeah. I get why they do that, because that's a design decision that people make, but it also, for a lot of other people, that design decision makes some people roll their eyes and be like, come on,
No.
Everybody has pants except that entire race of characters.
Yeah, I mean, I had the exact same response when I picked this up to just go back and play it a couple of years ago. I picked up the original PS2 version. I only got a couple hours in for a variety of reasons. And then 15 as well. My partner and I started that, and we got to Cindy, and I was like, sorry, this is... And actually, my girlfriend really enjoyed it, so I watched her play through most of it until she got sick of it. But there is certainly that kind of odd character design can be be at cross purposes to the actual game itself, depending on who you are as a player. And I think in terms of combat system, I played a bit of 15, and I don't remember it being like this at all. I feel like in 13 you could, as you mentioned, you could give people different roles, and you had a sort of a proto job system almost. And in 15 it's not like that at all. I feel like everyone has their own role, they have their own side skill, and that's it. And so I feel like in a way, Final Fantasy the non-massively multiplayer ones have kind of moved away from this very open-minded and diverse approach to character design in favor of very strong, like, defined characters. So, I don't know. I don't know if that's good or bad.
I prefer the strongly defined characters, mostly because, again, as I said, when you have characters that can do everything, then you never have any impetus to change your party up.
Yeah.
Right.
Like Final Fantasy X was very much fun for me for that, because for the first like 80% of the game, like the tutorial section, the island is like, oh, all right, there are flans, bring Lulu out to use her magic, or there are flyers to bring Waka out to because he has really high aim, or and things like that. And so I don't know, it just if I can make Terra be like the goddess of both melee and magic, why bring any other character? And so for the same thing for 12 for me, where I ended up creating my like set of like 3 characters that I always brought, and the other 3 just basically laid fallow because what's the point? There's no reason to bring them.
I bet you that's why I don't remember Bosch at all. I probably just never used him.
Because you probably just kept the 3 characters you had, because you're like, I have a bunch of license points on these. I don't want to level somebody else.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had the exact same. I think I did something very similar, and like, I'm not crazy about the idea that you can't change jobs effectively. Like, it seems like once in this new version, once you pick, that's the one you are. But it at least makes the player's choices feel meaningful and have weight, like significant weight up front, and that's kind of rare in these days. Like, I almost mentioned Dark Souls. I'm not going to mention Dark Souls. Never mind.
I was going to say the job system only surprises me in that regard, and that like what I love so much with the tactics job system was that the point was to eventually make characters who could fill multiple roles. But the part of the reason was that you wanted a paladin who could dual wield these amazing swords, but in order for them to do that, they had to be a ninja first. And so there was this class progression tree kind of thing, where you would make all these characters be different classes until eventually you had a paladin who could dual wield. Like, your main character was a paladin who could dual wield the swords and do these other crazy abilities, which was kind of the fun of that. This is absolutely not the way to go. But while we're here, let's just dive into this, because we're finally looking at this license system. So I already did some upgrades, but so the way this works is you go on a wheel and you pick a class. Vaughn is a Shikari, which seems to be some kind of ninja character. And this very nice checkerboard here illuminates the ways that you can their abilities you can work for here at the end of the board. And you sort of just like, it's kind of like a skill tree by another name, but if it's one half UI and the other half like kind of interesting abilities, it works for me. Like, this is how you get more gambits, so you can program more stuff. Like, that's up here in this end. And way back at the end right here, one of his missed thing, Red Spiral's up here. But I'm working towards trying to be able to equip ninja swords, just because those are hanging out here. Oh, but then, like, see, like, look at this. Like, Red Spiral is twice in the tree, because they're trying to make sure you don't... Or maybe that's just a more powerful version.
It's how you level it up. When you've got one of them, you can spend 1 mischarge on it. When you have 2, you can spend 2. And when you have 3, you can spend...
But, like, either way, if I was working my way up here right now, because for some reason I really wanted the Ega Blades... I don't know if these are prerequisites or not, but I assume the point... like 100 points, 30 points. I assume that's the wall here that encourages you to branch out down here, where 30, 60, 90, like, these are cheaper down here. And they're built off what's before. So it's like, that's Vaughn. Let's look at... right, we can do this. Baltier's Mist is, like, right here, right after you start. And pretty easy to acquire points-wise. I actually think I have some points. I'll spend them on something.
This whole system is mystifying. Like, I played this game a couple years ago, not this version, the original version, obviously. And so, but I have some vague memory of a system like this.
Yeah.
But just looking at it now, it's not necessarily bad, but it doesn't very effectively communicate to the player how it works or why. I think you have to use it for a bit to really understand, like, how you get to new abilities, how you spec a character build out. This is just kind of mystifying as an observer.
It's like
it's funny
the
to see
sphere.
it.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was gonna say it's a lot like the sphere grid, except with less of the lines and UI, etc. Because I mean, if you think about it, as every node has like one to 4 different things. I like graph theory. Edges. Every node has like 1 to 4 edges. It is the sphere grid. That's all it is. But in this case, it's without the sphere grid. The benefit of it is you had lines from each node to node. It made it very obvious at the beginning that you're making a path. You're creating a path through it. And while the license board has a lot more degrees of freedom because almost every node has 4 edges as opposed to the sphere grid where most only had 2, you got there and then you left.
Right.
It does create a bit more of a visual mess, as you're alluding to.
I think you're right. Like the reference to a path is spot on. It reminds me of I'm playing Odin Sphere Life Thunzer right now, which is a remake of Vanillaware's game Odin Sphere. Yeah, and they have a very similar leveling system that looks very akin to a sphere grid, and it's very readable because you're right. It just lays out discrete paths, and you can decide exactly which abilities you want, and you know how to get there. And you can do that here as well. It's just
it takes a lot more thought. You need to be a lot more what's the term I'm looking for? Deliberate about it, as opposed to the sphere grid, which sort of guided you.
It's funny to see this 10 years on because the license grid looks a lot like the weapon upgrade system in the most recent Ratchet and Clank game.
I didn't know that. Please, how so?
It's like a similar sort of thing where it's just this, like, each weapon has a grid that expands out as you like unlock more and more and more and more bits, and each little element is a specialized function, just like the license grid here.
Oh jeez. Sorry.
You found the Mimic Queen.
It's cool, Brian. You got this.
There you
This is how
go.
we're gonna go
I
out.
hope you've unlocked Thunder.
I haven't.
You'd be
That's
fine.
I hope I haven't.
Yeah.
All right, let's slow this down and make sure.
Now speed it up. Just make it really good. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, no, I'm eager to go back and look at this now. It's with the sphere grid and the not the sphere grid, the anti-sphere grid, the sphere board, skill board, job board, license board. Thank you. And the gambit system, and I think this game just stands out as an interesting, like idiosyncratic Final Fantasy, like a really useful like step on a path that like developers can now like pull apart because it's been re-released and it's prettier and it's more with the speed up options and everything, it's more approachable. And I don't know, I kind of wonder what would have happened if games had like kind of doubled down. I think we touched on this earlier, but like it makes me wonder what would have happened if like we'd taken a different path and more games that embrace this kind of like programmatic approach to strategy rather than just kind of falling.
You have
back
to keep in mind that the conversations in the game industry at the time this was being made were so interesting because if you went to GDC in 2005, 2006, all of the talks, everything was the future of games is MMOs, everything's going to be gigantic 1,000-person development teams, and games will a single game will stick around for 10 years.
Right.
And then literally 1 year later, the iPhone came out, and everyone was like, "Oh shit, never mind. Everything's gonna be a game that you put together in 2 months with 2 people."
Right.
And this is one of the it's so clear that this is a game that was inspired by the embiggening of game worlds at the time. It's not an MMO, but it's it's an open world in many ways, with a hell of a long story, and it's everything that was going on at that time, and then the world changed.
It's kind of interesting how what we were discussing this, with some different developers a few weeks ago, like how MMOs began to influence the game industry. Like, this is a vision of where things were going, and then everything took a big left turn, and now we have, like, Destiny. You have your Destinies and your mobile MMOs instead of a million World of Warcrafts and World of Warcraft-sized games.
Yeah.
Right.
Although, I mean, they've said, like, when Jeremy Parish published an oral history of this game on Polygon a week or two ago, And one of the questions he asked was like, were you influenced by MMOs while working on this, right? Because FF11 was up and operational while they were doing this, and they said like, no, I mean, maybe not. They were like, not intentionally, and we had a very clear vision. But a lot of people on staff were playing FF11 while they were working on this game, and they're like, maybe that influenced the scope we built at and the way we designed encounters and everything else. So like, I think that kind of influence is in some way evident in this game's design. Although, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong.
It's funny because when I first looked at FF12, I remember being turned off a bit by the MMO-esqueness of it. Like I cut my teeth on the Realm Online way back when it was like that and Meridian 59 were like the first two graphical muds, right?
Yeah.
And I loved the Realm. That was great. And then I remember trying to move on to Ultima Online and EverQuest, and they were too grindy for me. Which is funny, the Realm Online is nothing but grind. There's very little to it. But and I remember playing those for a few hours and then being like, nope, this is not for me. This gameplay is really boring, blah, blah, blah. And then I think World of Warcraft came out around the just before FF12 came out, I think, if I remember timelines correct.
It's around there. I feel like it's in very early 2000s.
Yeah.
Sure.
And that was another game that I picked up. I played Vanilla WoW. I got to level 40, and I was like, nope, too grindy, not for me. So then when FF12 came out, I was like, oh my god, another MMO game, except now it's single player. And I basically didn't play it for a year until later, and then I was like, well, okay, I might as well get it because I'm a big FF nerd, and you know what, I'll own it, whatever. I'll just deal with it and play it. And yes, it had that MMO feel, but I also didn't have to worry about other people. And having that solid storyline, because that was another thing that MMOs didn't do at the time, was like FF11, I think, was the closest thing to having like a proper storyline in what we would consider a storyline in video games compared to other RPGs, JRPGs, Western RPGs, etc. And so for me, like the fact that it had a solid storyline was the huge draw for me once I finally got over my anti-MMO-ness at the time, which is funny because I've been playing WoW for 8 years now and I raid lead and all that. So clearly I've had a change of heart on the MMO thing. But yeah, no, for me, the initial thing where it did look like an MMO. It quacked like an MMO. It felt like an MMO. So
I agree. And I think we've been all over the place in the stream, which is kind of the point. These are more free flowing, just like, hey, let's just talk about this thing that is an event in the game industry. But we got to wrap it up because we have sucked up an hour of your time. So do we have any closing thoughts now that this game is being re-released over a decade later, about what makes this game interesting and valuable for game developers to study?
I don't know. I mean, I'm sitting here watching it right now, and we're talking about the MMO influence on it, but at the same time, just looking at wandering through this desert, attacking random monsters, it still feels so much like this is what the Final Fantasy 1, walking around in a big field of green that's supposed to be a forest. Like it still feels like even from there's a direct line. This is where it was all headed. This is the culmination of all of that. It still feels like Final Fantasy. You could put this next to the first game that came out in the 80s and they still feel the same, even though the characters are all different, even though the worlds are different, even though the presentation is different and the technology, everything is different, but it still feels like a Final Fantasy game. There's something kind of fascinating about that, and not something that I necessarily know too many other franchises you can point to and in gaming with that sort of long lineage and say they've been that successful at.
Yeah, I agree. Joey, how about you?
I said it before, and I mean, I'll say it again. I think Final Fantasy as a whole has never been afraid to experiment with game systems, with storylines, with characters. And I think that's something that we need. Like, the game industry is often really risk averse, and for good reason. When you're putting that much money into a project, you're like, oh, well, you don't want to do something risky necessarily because you're probably not going to make your money back. My own game is one of those things where it's like, yeah, that's a lesson. And but at the same time, like, it shows that you can be risky, you can be successful, you can do really cool things, really interesting things, be very different from the previous game in your own system, and still put out something that people look back on fondly. And yeah, they have quibbles or whatever, but no game is perfect. And I think trying to be that perfect game or find that perfect game is a fool's errand. And so make something unique.
Make something for somebody, not like an audience. I think that's too broad, but
I'll tell you the other thing I've found. I've been in the industry long enough that I've learned that there's like a 5-year incubation period with people's reactions to games. That's the other thing. Like, when a game first comes out, sure, it has a super short lifespan in terms of, you've got a couple months before there's the next big thing that everyone's talking about, and that press stops covering it and all that sort of stuff. But 5 years later, when people are making best of lists, that thing that everyone was like, at the time it came out and it had got 7s and everyone was like ho hum about it, but in retrospect it's actually a fantastic game and one of my favorites and I don't know why that is, but that always seems to be the case. I see that in gaming press all the time, that sentiment of, at the time it was overlooked, but hey, guess what, it's actually really great. Things just seem to ferment for, like, appreciation of games ferments on about a 5-year time schedule. I don't know why that is.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we as humans overly emphasize our immediate reactions and like don't respect our like long-term ability to like reflect and think and like let a thing grow on us in a way. I feel that way about movies, books, certainly games. Brian, how about you? You want to take us out?
Yeah. I will buy this map and then begin the closing ceremonies. Thank you all for joining us today on the Gamasutra Twitch channel. I have been Brian Francis, contributing editor at Gamasutra. The game is Final Fantasy XII, The Zodiac Age. It is available now if you want to dive back into the world of Evilis. Evilise. I don't know. I was having fun there. I've been lucky enough to be joined by Alex, Jesse, and Joey. Thank you all so much for coming on today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
And I'm just also going to toss that if you could please follow the Gamasutra Twitch channel, we would super appreciate it. We have a lot of other great streams to bring to you over the month of July, despite the dearth of games being released. That we're playing one from 11 years ago. I'm just kidding. The re-release is fine.
I love old games. They're great.
Alex streams old games on this channel if you want to look back at games that have not gotten this fine remastered touch and just play something cool. And actually on Friday, I'm going to go ahead and plug the interview on Friday. I'm super excited because we are talking with some tabletop game developers from Fantasy Flight about the X-Wing
You're
Miniatures.
So excited about this.
I'm so excited about this. Yeah, the X-Wing Miniatures game, because I've been obsessed with it. I've been buying X-Wings, and now I get to talk to the people who make that game. So if you want to see me being really excited about a tabletop game, come on by. It should be a lot of fun. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much.
Hang on. We should, if anyone, Jesse and then Joey, if anybody wants to keep updated on what you're up to, do you have somewhere that you like to send them to? A Twitter page, a studio page, anything like that?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at Oogew. OOGEW.
Good.
Thanks.
You can follow me on Twitter at TalarianJS, TalarianJS. My base name wasn't available. Or you can follow Flying Helmet Games at FHG_games to learn more about the games that we're working on.
Nice. Sorry to interrupt, Brian.
Well, goodbye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks for coming. Bye.